The title of this chapter is tantalizing: Why the Elements Are So Disposed and Ordered. And what does Bonatti cover in this chapter? The order of the elements. There is no why. What's up, wizards? Today we're going to go ahead and finish off part 1 of Treatise 2, which is Signs and Houses. Again, we are going through the Ben Dykes translation of Guido Bonatti's Book of Astronomy. We've done it using the nice little cut-up books, which you can buy on Amazon. I would have linked you to Dykes' page directly, but Dykes links to Amazon directly, so go ahead and pick up your copy, and you can follow along as we continue our search through this massive tome to grab astrological knowledge put to uses for our purposes. So, 3. The title of this chapter is tantalizing: Why the Elements Are So Disposed and Ordered. And what does Bonatti cover in this chapter? The order of the elements. There is no why. He doesn't discuss why at all. But I will tell you his order. So his order is fire above, bordering immediately on the moon in the concavity of the globe, then air, then water, then earth. So he says there's a bunch of reasons, I'm sure, because that's what he always does. There are many reasons, but I'm going to give you 1 or 2 of them. So I will hazard a why for you. So the reason why fire is on top is because fire's primary quality is heat. And heat being the primary quality, that pushes it higher and higher because heat is part of what drives everything up. Then the second highest is air below fire, and that's because air is not as hot as fire, and it instead is the moisture, which means that air is not quite as rarefied or active as fire. Then after that, you have water, because you have that moisture and coldness. So it being cold is going to be heavy, but moisture is going to be lighter than dryness. And then you have earth, which is cold and dry, and therefore the most gross or heavy of the elements. So that is why they are so disposed and ordered, with a bit of guesswork from me, Michael Beeson. So onward to what Bonatti says in Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is to show that the elements are only 4, neither more nor less. This chapter is kind of circular logic. Bonatti really needed to understand his debate a bit more, but we'll go ahead and cover it because it is valuable. I'm going to do a little bit more reading than normal in this one because he lays out kind of a theory of how the elements work. And it also relates back to Chapter 3, which we just kind of covered, where I made a guess. And this actually adds a layer to how that works. And we'll discuss that too. So the elements could be but 4, neither more nor less, because each elemental body consists of 4 elements. And it has in itself 4 qualities, namely heat, dryness, coldness, and moisture. And these 4 things happen to it, namely generation, durability or conservation, corruption, and destruction. Speaking thusly, it is generated most strongly by heat. It endures by dryness. It is corrupted by moisture. It is destroyed by coldness. Understand these things soundly. These 4 beings abide in every and about every elemental thing. For it takes heat from fire, moisture from the air, coldness from water, dryness from the earth, whence since the accidents of the elements are not found nor exist except by being 4, and they are drawn from the elements, it is necessary that the elements be exactly 4, neither more nor less. Insofar as the elements are simple, pure in their own spheres, they have simple qualities ruling them: fire, heat, air, moisture, water, coldness, earth, dryness, which we already covered, right? But insofar as they are connected and entangled, they have composite qualities with respect to each other, namely fire, heat and dryness, air, heat and moisture, water, coldness and moisture, earth, coldness and dryness. So, what I think is most interesting there is we start talking about generation, which is handled by heat, and then dryness is enduring. So that is interesting, because also the you have destroyed by coldness and corrupted by moisture. So that would be something to play with. And if you consider generation plus destruction, that is fire. And then you have generation plus corruption is air. And then you have the destruction plus corruption is water. And then destruction plus persistence is earth. But the primary of fire's generation, the primary of earth is persistence. And then the primary of air is corruption. And the primary of water is destruction. So that's really something that you're going to have to play with and think about it in terms of those things happening to something. So why are the elements only 4? Because the model that encompasses everything can be reduced to 4 states or 4 components. And that lets us really explore those things, and it creates a full model of the universe. So you have that because you don't need any more for your model. That's really why it's 4. Which is not a scientific type explanation, but it is an engineering type explanation. So you work with this as a model, and that's really all you can do with astrology or with these ancient philosophies. They're working models more than they are scientific truths. And I think that if you really look at them that way, you'll get a whole lot more out of this study. And if you don't expect them to unlock the whole secret of the universe, but instead provide you a working model of the whole of the universe that you can use to great effect in your own life and in the world around you, and also when thinking about things, I think that you'll be really good off, and that will definitely help you develop personal agency as well as give you a model to explore those phenomenon around you and to start to really ask the questions that make you understand how do these elements interplay, because everything that you interact with that's physical is composed of them, and really kind of look at how things decay and how they grow, and consider the elements in that context. We all want to be the Captain Planet Planeteers with our magic rings, but it's a lot more useful to really look at these as the processes and building blocks of experience and of the physical world. We can talk about salamanders and gnomes and sylphs and Undine all day long, and that's fun, but the world is full of elementals, including your own body. So that is how I will approach chapter 4. onward to chapter 5. So why are the signs so ordered or disposed? And what are we asking here? So if you follow the wheel of the zodiac, you will find that the way the elements are organized is it always goes a fire sign, followed by an earth sign, followed by an air sign, followed by a water sign. So we'll take spring and the beginning of summer as an example. So spring starts with Aries, fire. Then it goes to a Taurus, earth. A Taurus, that's right, earth. And then that's followed by Gemini, air, which is followed by Cancer, water. So the question is, why are the signs of the zodiac ordered in that way? And that's how it's going to be all the way across the 12 signs. It's always in that order of fire, earth, air, water. So why is that? And Bonatti, of course, approaches the sages. He's humble that way. And it's like, yo, they figured this out. There's lots of reasons for it. And I'm going to give you a couple. And that's kind of how he kind of covers himself. He gives you what he feels is the most compelling reason. And then from there, he'll kind of like give you a couple of other ideas. So he starts with the example that you have fire, which is chiefly about generation. And then after something's generated, at that point, it needs to be durable or conservative. So you create something new, and then it has to last to be acted upon. So if it's going to last, then it has to have that earthiness. And then after that, you have corruption, and then destruction. So that's kind of the natural rhythm of life is generation, stability, or conservation, followed by corruption or degeneracy, and then a full-on destruction. So it's kind of the breathing process of the universe. And that he thinks is a good reason. And only one of the reasons. The next reason he gives is that you have the individual qualities themselves. So fire is heat and dryness. Well, what is earth? Earth is cold and dryness. So you're covering dryness in both, and you're covering heat and cold. And one of the things he says is that heat and cold are agents. So they act upon things. So heat and cold act, whereas moisture and dryness are acted upon. So fire being the greater of the actors should be first, and earth being the greater of the patients should be next. Then the weaker actor being air comes third, followed by the weakest, which shares nothing in common with fire. And that would be water. So he covers that, and then he restates that, and he restates it again. So it really kind of comes down to looking at the qualities and looking at the natural rhythm of life cycles. So you have the kickoff where things are generated, they start at the beginning. Then you have the process where they stick around for a while, what things fortify them and help them to stay. Then you start having them acted upon by air, and they start to be broken down. So they become a bit less than they were, just because they're starting to be transformed. Now, it's still a generation, but it's the other parts of them being generated. So you have that corruption going on. You can think of it as the way that moisture pervades things, and then nasty things grow in it and start breaking things down. You have that happen, and then the whole system falls apart, and it leaves a corpse, which is then acted upon by fire to create something new. Or that you can look at the various ways that flows through the year too with the signs. So that is the basic description of how that works. So why do we start with Aries? I mean, of course, that would be too easy. So instead we ask, why the denomination of the signs begins from Aries and not from any other sign? So why do we start with Aries? And of course, he says for a few reasons. For many reasons, I'll give you a few of these. And the first one he starts with is, think about the sky having two circles, or sky, and you have the circle of the equator, and you have the circle of the signs of the zodiac. And where they intersect are Aries and its opposites, so Aries and Libra. Aries being the first of the signs that is north of the equator at this intersection, and that means that it's the first of the northern signs, and the north being more noble and strong, and Aries being the beginning of that, means that Aries is the most noble and strong of the places and the natural starting point, because spheres have no actual beginning, so you kind of have to guesstimate with that. The second reason he offers is because when the sun enters Aries, the day begins to be longer than the night. So that's a beginning. It's the whole conquering sun process. And again, you have this is reinforcing the nobility. So what you're going to be seeing, and I hope you're seeing as we're discussing this, is that you get multiple indicators for each thing. So with this, you have the beginning of the northern being stronger. You have the increasing of light starting, and that's another of these more noble things. And the third reason spends a lot of time explaining it, but I can probably do this a little bit quicker than he does it by losing some words. But please, definitely pick up the book and read it so that you can get all of Bonatti's stuff. But he says that if you look at it, you look for that which is most potent. So what part of life do you have the most potential? Is there the most energy that's pushing you forward? Youth. Because you're now starting to come into your strength. You're slowly developing, and you have the most potential. When you're in your youth, you have the most choices before you. At that point, no one knows if you're going to be the king or the president of the United States, or a great scientist, or a noble janitor, or what you're going to do, because you still haven't gotten that figured out. So you're full of potential and full of life. And Aries shares that quality, because when the sun is in Aries, everything starts to multiply. That's plants begin to germinate, and flowers begin to bloom. So you have that all of the world is young whenever we're in Aries, and is starting to really experience that flowering of youth. So that's why we start at Aries, because that's when things have their own agency too. Because you're no longer an infant. You're really you have separated yourself from where you're at, and you're starting to really grow into your role as a youth, but you still have maximum potential. And all of those are the reasons why we start with Aries, because we start where there's the most potential to move from, and there's the most life, the most verve. I don't know. I'm horrible with languages. I'm an American wizard. So that is the conclusion of chapter 6. So one of the things that we've really been hammering home is the zodiacal, like the constellations are not the signs. And notice, but Bonatti does not say anything about, oh, this is Aries because it looks like a bull because some bored cowherd thought, oh, no, Taurus, Ram, Aries, Ram. Oh yeah, some cowherd sages just were hanging out, or some sheep herders, and they were bored and they looked at the sky and they saw it was a ram, and that's why we based all of the astrology on it being a ram. And then they thought that one looked like a cow, and that one looked like a couple of people, and oh look, over there's a crab, and it all lined up magically. That's totally no. There's this system that's really coming together here, and I definitely hope that it's impressing upon you that what's going on with the system is deeper than just basing stuff off of the stars. It's more about the pieces in time and the cycles. And you have what slivers of the sky the sun's in, and the constellations, the way that we use them, and the way that we, especially those of us who are tropical astrologers, is those are memory aids. And again, tropical astrology works fine. If tropical astrology didn't work, then we would have to revisit and start really examining the stars and constellations. Now, the stars and constellations do matter. They are very important, especially if you get into astrological magic, and when you start to see the use of fit stars in astrology, when we're doing bigger things like natal charts, they come into play a little bit. Mundane, they come into play a lot. So those stars do matter, but what matters more than the star is the amount of light you have in the day, and whether light is increasing or decreasing in the day, and those kinds of things, and what's happening in the world when the sun is in those signs. So that seems to be more of the model of astrology than, oh look, there's a ram in the sky, or a bull in the sky, or some twins in the sky, or somebody pouring some water out of a pitcher in the sky. That stuff is to help you remember this stuff. So don't mistake the printed numerals on the clock for the time. That's not how any of this works. So what Bonatti does in chapter 7 is he goes into why are the signs known by these names, and he does not once say it's because the stars look like a thing. And I'm going to do a lot of reading in this, but I want to break it down, and we'll discuss it as we go. So, we start with the sun enters Aries, heat is increased, for the reason the sun begins to be elongated from the equinoctial line and approaches towards the zenith of the northern region, and he is made strong in accordance with how the ram is said to have powers with respect to the strong ones of the animals. So what does any of that mean? It means that the sun is moving higher into the sky, and that it's starting to take on these properties of it's a strong and sure time for the sun, and everything's coming to life. And it said that that resembles the way that a ram functions. A ram is a strong animal, and it comes into its own and gets stronger. And that those 30 degrees mimic that kind of a life. And then when we go into Taurus, the heat is increased and made stronger, more so that when the sun was in Aries. And this is likened to the nature of the bull, Taurus, because the bull is an animal stronger than the ram. And the declination of the sun from the equator and his approach to the zenith of the northern regions becomes greater than when he was in Aries. So you have more of the same. You no longer have a beginning because the beginning's already happened. And that's the Aries. Now you have it's come into its fullness, and it's strong, and it's like a bull instead of like a ram. And at that point, it's Taurus. So then we go on to Gemini. Why Gemini? And what's with these mutable themes anyway? Then the sun enters Gemini, and the sign is called the Twins because the heat is doubled and duplicated beyond what it had been at first. And this last point of its elongation from the equator of the day and of his approach the highest point over our heads. So, you no longer have, when stocks get to be too pricey, one of the things that companies do is split the stocks. And this is like showing this like weird doubling, but the heat I don't think really necessarily doubles quite the way that it's described here. I think it's more of you look at it like a stock's going up dramatically, you split the stock, and then each one is worth half of what it was or 3/4, and complicated financial wizardry I don't understand, based on some kind of calculated dull magic. I probably shouldn't even talked about this stuff. CPAs are scary wizards of dark arts. So yeah. So you have the split. So stocks are worth equally about half, but if the company is increasing, then you end up with a lot of money, and it can get to the point where it's getting very close to what it was, and you effectively have doubled your money if the market's like excited. And I think that's more of the way that this doubling happens is a point where you have days that are wicked hot, like the summer, and then you have days that are more mild but still hotter than the mildness of the bull. So you have this back and forth, and the average is this raising higher strength. And that's probably where I should have started with that. So I apologize for the stock stuff. Just ignore all of that and focus more on that you have this doubling, and that there are now two, and the average of the two is much greater than the one, because those super hot days that are the spoiler alert for summer, or the foreshadowing for summer, really is kind of how that works, to my mind. Then the sun begins to return towards the equator of the day, and that is when it said that he enters the crab, because the crab is backwards moving animal, whence just as the crab is said to go sometimes forwards and afterwards then return backwards, so the sun is elongated from the equinoctial line to his last elongation. He has returned from the last elongation towards the equinoctial line, and then he is said to go backwards like a crab goes. So what is going here? The sun reaches its zenith and it starts to descend. That is what's going on here, because you get 2 seasons in each half of the year. So we're in that northern that we were talking about before, how the north is the stronger and more noble and more active half of the circle of the zodiac, because it's over the equator as opposed to below the equator. It's the way that those two circles connect. Like, I have graphics, but I think fingers are better, right? So do this yourself. Do this yourself. And then you'll have the equator and you'll have the zodiacal, right? Have these two things. Do it. I'm not. Okay. You've done it. I know you've done it. So we have those two circles, and spring and summer happen there. So it's going to have to cross the equator again. We're going to actually have to hit Libra, and that's when things change to the southern hemisphere, or the southern part of the zodiac. So what do we do after we have Cancer? Then the sun goes out of Cancer. He enters Leo. And it is said that he is in the lion because heat is increased and becomes stronger and sharper and harder on account of the depurified air, that he does not then take part in any moisture. Whence, because the lion is a hard or inflexible animal, strong and very rough, this sign was denominated from that animal. Lions are not domestic. I know Siegfried and Roy will tell you different, but they are very wrong. Lions are wild and they kill you. Lions will eat you. Lions have always been predators of men, and if you try to tame one, it can be tamed, but it's not like I know you are totally thinking of the cute little cubs and the whole Tiger King stuff and the big cats there. But one of the things that they really allude to in all of that is that they get unmanageable when they get big, and they get more dangerous when they get big. And if you look at it, rams and bulls are domesticated animals. They can be used for our purposes. When it comes to a lion, it becomes much more dangerous, and the heat of summer here is much more dangerous. So it's gone backwards like a crab. That's when it starts to kind of do that. But then it becomes unmanageable and dangerous. And if you remember, we go all the way back to what happens whenever the sun is in Leo. Things hide. Things don't generate. They don't make babies. Fruit trees become mature and they drop a lot more because they're being stalked by the heat of the lion. Then the heat is relaxed. Nor does it increase of things happen, nor generation which is ordained apart from the generation of certain seeds. And this the sign called Virgo, or virgin, because a virgin is humble and sterile animal, and therefore all things tend towards decrease and virtual sterility. Tonight I am totally having trouble reading. It's probably because my library is a mess behind me. So yeah, everything's hidden. The heat's hunted everything down. So what follows is you don't have increase at all. You have the consequences of that heat, and even though things cool off, the consequences are still there. Then the sun enters the scales, Libra, because then the day is equal with the night, and the heat is relaxed, and the effect in equality becomes coldness and heat, because then cold begins somewhat to take on power, and all things are then in equality. So this is the exact mirror of Aries. You now have the day has already been getting shorter, but at this point, the day becomes equal to the night, and then the night starts gaining on power, but it's very mild in the beginning. But it seems like this nice temperate equality, and how everything kind of mirrors out, even though you're slowly losing. It's slowly trickling away, and I think that might tell you something about Libra. That would be interesting. Then the sun enters the Scorpion, and cold is increased above heat, and now cold comes to be, now hot, and the air is made distemperate, and rains come to be, and vicious illness are generated, and pestilential ones, and ones bringing death and all manner of poison and the like. And therefore this sign is denomination from that poisonous animal, the scorpion. So we have the mixture of bad. You have cold and wet. You have corruption. You have those things which corrupt come out. And creepy, crawly things. The kinds of things that you freak out and call the exterminator about. The things that have lots of poison, the things that will hurt you, the aches and pains that come with that part of fall. That's all part of Scorpio, and you can see it as this crawling thing and having this venom that it can sting you with, and it stings those things around it and causes corruption. So you can kind of view in Scorpios happening a bunch of little scorpions of decay injecting their poisons into things and causing them to decay. Likewise, you have the rains, and moisture is decaying thing. So the more wet you have, the more miasma forms, so the more diseases spread. So that brings us to the Sagittarius. The cold is clearly increased over heat, and the sun is said to enter the Archer, because then mutations of the air take place, and the air comes down on the side of coldness, and strong hoar frosts come upon things, and snows and ice emitted from the air, like arrows wounding the ensouled and invigorated things. So instead of getting that scorpion sting with the poison that corrupts, you're getting Sagittarius's ice arrows that are themselves stinging and driving home this destruction by itself. You're no longer this subtle corruption. You're now getting that sting of those iced arrows coming. Then the cold is increased above heat, and hot is practically put to rest, and the air comes down to a distemperate and melancholic coldness. And then many snows come to be, and the ultimate cold and ice. The like went since the goat Capricorn is cold and dry animals and melancholic. The sign was denominated from that animal. The sun is then his final declination from the equator towards the south. So, at this point, you get the goat. And I have been around goats a little bit. I know many people who raise goats, and they kind of have a mind of their own. I'm not really sure where you get melancholy associated with the goat. I would have to really, really, really think about that one. And I will charge you guys to do homework and tell me in the comments, why are goats melancholic? Why are goats melancholic? About a sheep and a goat? Interesting. Ram. Maybe worth discussing, but please let me know in the comments what you think. Then the sun begins to turn back towards the equator, and then the cold begins to diminish somewhat, and sometimes the rains take place instead of snows, and the air is made more moist once the sign is denominated Aquarius, the water bearer, from such disposition of the air then thriving. So the air starts to become more moist and less cold, which tells you that the air becomes more air-like and less water-like. So you have the rains coming, Aquarian rains, are warming up enough. They're still cold, but there's a promise there. And that being the water bearer. So that's interesting in itself. Then the sun enters Pisces, and that sign's dominated from the fish, which are watery animals, because the rains abound more so than in other seasons of the year, unless perhaps by accident. And if there were snows or hoarfrosts or ice, they are converted more quickly to water than other wintry times. So at that point, Pisces becomes super wet. And that's interesting. Definitely a layout there that may be stretching in some places, but still does not rely on the constellations themselves, and is more saying this is where we get the names of the constellations, are how things are affected by the seasons. And that brings us to the end of part 1 of signs and houses. So starting next video, we're going to be discussing the nature of the essential circle. So going into much greater detail about the zodiac. And so again, tell me why goats are melancholic. And I will see you guys next time. Until then, good astrology.